Welcome back, everyone. Today on our podcast, we are joined by Zack the Russian. He is a Russian citizen, critical of the war in Ukraine. Currently, he is a YouTuber with about 41,000 subscribers. Zack, thank you for joining the podcast. Welcome to the channel. How are you doing today?
Yeah, hello Jake, and hello the viewers. Yeah, my name is Zach, and thank you so much for having me here today. It is really important to show that there are some Russians out there, not many, but at least some, who are critical about the war, about the current regime in Russia, about Putin specifically. So yeah, thank you for having me today, and yeah, hope we have a great conversation today.
So I expect that most of my audience has no clue who you are. You look a little young. I'm going to ask you some questions so that people can understand your background a little bit better. First of all, how old are you?
Yes, I'm 21. I've turned 21 2 months ago in the end of August. I've started my YouTube channel when I was 19, and I left Russia when I was 20. Yeah.
Well, happy birthday.
Yeah.
Where in Russia are you from?
Originally, I'm from the far east of Russia, the city of Komsomolsk-on-Amur. It's a pretty young city. It was built in the middle of the 20th century, basically because, the Soviet Union needed to build more cities in the Far East to protect it from China in the near future and from Japan. So the city, it was the city that was built by Komsomol organization. Maybe some of those who were learning of the Soviet history, they've heard this name. It's the name of youth organization. And my great-grandma, she was one of those youngsters who were sent in her 20s to build a city somewhere in the swamps in the middle of the Far East. And I'm from the Far East. It's like basically 7,000 kilometers from Moscow. It's a pretty big. And I remember when I've been to the US, I was showing the foreigners where I'm from, and they were like, "Oh, why don't you look Asian?" We were thinking, it's China. You should look Asian. Now I'm looking like European because most of my ancestors are actually from the western part of Russia. But historically, it happened that I was born in the Far East. Yeah.
So you are actually the first Russian I personally have ever spoken to from the Far East. That's pretty interesting. And you just mentioned you spent time in the United States. What were you doing in the United States?
Yes, basically, I spent half a year, about 5 months in the US as an exchange student. So I was studying in Moscow at the university, and I've applied for an exchange program by the American Embassy in Moscow. It's something like a scholarship, and there are different stages. It's competitive. So I won the scholarship. I went to the US as an exchange student for half a year. It was totally funded by the American Embassy in Moscow, and it was a really great experience. I was going for college, staying with the host family, traveling around the US, visiting different parts of the US, getting this American experience of myself. It was really great, and I'm really glad I made this trip. And actually, it was right before the war. I came back from the US in January 2022.
So you were studying at St. Paul Community College, right?
Yeah, right. I was staying in Minnesota in St. Paul College. My major is linguistics. So I was taking some classes on English and also just history of the US and also the introduction to American government, which was quite interesting. Yeah.
So I'm personally from Wisconsin, which is on the border with Minnesota. I actually lived in Minneapolis for 2 summers. I was a
Oh,
roller
wow.
coaster ride operator at Valley Fair Amusement Park. Maybe you heard of it while you were there, but I don't think you probably got to visit. I
Wow.
also went to university
Um,
at UW-Eau Claire, which is about 100 kilometers from where you went to school.
oh, wow. Yeah. I've been to Milwaukee myself, and I believe to Green Bay. Uh, Wisconsin is pretty nice. To be honest, I prefer Minnesota more because I got all my friends over there. But yeah, Wisconsin was pretty cool. And maybe I've been to that park that you mentioned because Minnesota, they provide a state fair every year. So I've been there. So maybe that's the place. I don't
I
know.
think I did see that video on your channel. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the Minnesota State Fair, a little bit different than Valley Fair Amusement Park. And I also saw on your channel you were able to visit New York City. What were your impressions of the Big Apple?
Oh, yes. New York City. Oh my gosh. It's like the capital of the world. It's basically the general impression I got in a week of exploring New York City. I also have been to different parts of it, and also been outside of New York City to a place called Brighton Beach. Maybe you've heard about it. That's a place where most of the post-Soviet immigrants live in. There are many Russians, Ukrainians, and everyone else from the USSR living in, and it was a huge experience, to be honest, to see what's going to happen to those post-Soviet immigrants if you put them in a bubble, in like this sphere, in the perfect capitalist conditions. What's going to happen to them? I was kind of like depressing at one point, and at the same time, it was really interesting cultural experience. Yeah, and New York City is like the capital of the world in every aspect. I think financial, cultural, in many of them. Yeah.
Well, every language, every nationality. I mean, if you go to New York City, you'll hear every language, every nationality is represented. It's a truly impressive place for people to visit, at least. I did see your video where you went to New York City and you described it. You said that everywhere you went, it smelled like either hot dogs or weed.
Yeah, that's
And as
actually
an
true.
American, I'm not offended. I think that's an accurate description. I've also visited New York City a couple times.
Yeah, sometimes like pee, but that's just something you have to go with. It's okay.
It's just a consequence of all the sewers, and it's just very densely populated.
Yeah, right.
So you were living in Moscow back in February when the war broke out, correct?
Yeah, right. I just came back from the US in January. I visited my family in the Far East, in Komsomolsk, in Khabarovsk, and then I came back to Moscow. Yes, and I just basically rented an apartment with my friend, stayed there for 2 weeks, and then 24th of February happened.
So were you about to go back to university, or what were you doing in Moscow at the time?
Yeah, my plan was, so basically I got a gap year because I took a gap year before I went to the US because my Russian university declined my kind of like, I asked them if they can transfer my credits from the American college to the university. They said no American colleges and schools allowed. Yeah, and I decided to take a gap year. So once I came back from the US, I still got this half a year left. So we're thinking, what should I do in Moscow? And my initial plan was actually making videos in English about Moscow in details, because actually there is not much of a YouTube videos and channels in English which are making videos especially about Moscow in details, in English, of course. I wanted to take this niche and making those videos for half a year, but 24th of February and Putin decided differently. Yeah.
Yeah, it disrupted your plans. It disrupted a lot of people's plans. And when the war broke out in February, you posted videos, you posted content where you participated in protests in Moscow. Can you just talk about what was your thinking? What was your reaction? How did you go about deciding to protest when the war broke out?
Yeah, 24th of February. Before that, like 22nd, 23rd, we were all really concerned if the war really going to happen. And of course, nobody believed that. Nobody ever was thinking it's going to be possible. And actually, even before I came back to Russia I believe in November, my American friend on the way to Chicago, he asked me like, "Oh, Zach, there are so many news about from the border between Russia and Ukraine. Do you think there's going to be a war?" I said, "No. Of course, no. Putin is just bluffing. He just wants to get a better condition for himself on the international stage." That's what I was thinking, and I guess most of us. 21st of February, when I woken up, usually I open Telegram, the main messenger I use to read news, to communicate with people, and usually there is a news channel which I read, and usually they post something about 40 news per 24 hours. So once I wake up, I have time to go through all of the 40 posts. But when I woken up 24th of February, I've seen something about 300 posts. And that number, just that one number, when I've seen it, I was shocked because I understood what happened. And the first thing, actually, I didn't start to read the news. I went directly to the ATM without brushing my teeth, without making my bed. I went directly to the ATM and cashed out all of the money I had. especially US dollars, which I had before from the US, from my trip to the US, from my stipend. Because I was thinking the first days they're gonna freeze people's savings, like all the money, so they're gonna go for the war. We at that point we didn't know what's going to happen to the people. If there's going to be mobilization in the first weeks, if there's going to be like just this default, if this going to happen in the first days. So that's what was my initial reaction. And then once I came back, I started to read news. I've spent like 5 hours going through the news, watching all those videos of Russian troops with the Z and V letters invading Ukraine. It was crazy. It was crazy for me. And of course, the first reaction was like, okay, we got to do something. We got to go to the streets. And I just came back from the US and I got a couple of friends over there from there, like also Russian exchange students. And most of them, they were living in Moscow, studying in the universities. And my friend texted me like, oh, Zach, we're going for the protest. I was like, hell yeah. We're going, yeah. And the protest was actually not organized by anyone. Usually in Russia, most of the protests, especially in big cities, they are being organized by somebody at least. For example, by the founder of the group of Navalny, his community basically. Usually they were organizing protests, but that day there were nobody who were organizing the protests. So people who wanted to go to the streets, they were like, okay, where are we going? Well, Pushkinskaya Square. That's the place where most of the protests happened in the last, let's say, 5 years. Okay, when is going to happen? 7 p.m. Why 7 p.m.? Because that's just a work day. Most of the people stopped working at 6 p.m., so they will have like an hour to make it to the place. And, somehow it happened that most of the people who wanted to go to the protests, they ended up being together at 7 p.m. on Pushkinskaya Square. So I went there with my friend, and it was a group of us, and we read that 1 hour before the protest, the Pushkinskaya Square and the metro close to Pushkinskaya, the metro station is called, it was closed already by the police. And everyone who were leaving the station, they were arrested right away. So we just understand that it's not gonna work for us if we go to that station. So we went to Цветной Boulevard station. It's like maybe 3 or 4 kilometers away from Pushkinskaya Square. So we went from there and just went to the Pushkinskaya Square, and already at maybe like 500 or 600 meters from the Pushkinskaya Square, there were already a lot of policemen. More policemen than protesters. Way more. And finally, we've seen a group of people going from the Pushkinskaya Square. I think before we came, they went to Pushkinskaya Square. They've seen it was blocked off from the roads, from everything, and they just came back and just went somewhere in some random direction. So we joined them. We went, and the only slogan we got is basically no war, no to war. Nothing about political prisoners, nothing about like corruption, just no war. That's the only slogan we had that day. And we only were able to go for like 3 minutes, I think. And in 3 minutes, Oftozaks, that's how we call in Russian the bus of police. And usually they arrest protesters and put them in those buses. So that's why it's called Oftozak. And Oftozaks started to basically drive on the crowd, to literally drive in crowd. So people started to run away, to just trying to hide from the police. So we ended up in some kind of small Moscow, like, old town street. It was pretty narrow. And I believe it was about maybe 700 or 1,000 people. People will not be able to gather around it that day. Usually when there were protests in Moscow, at least police, they allowed people to go around together to meet somewhere. And then they were, once there are many journalists, they've started to beat up the protesters. So those videos would leak to the internet.
Can I ask, have you ever participated in a protest before inside Russia for any other reason?
Yeah, sure. I've participated a lot. Usually, mostly in Komsomolsk and Khabarovsk. That's my home regions, and I spent a lot of time there.
What are some other causes that people protest for that the police don't immediately break up?
Basically, there were a couple of protests for Navalny, for his freedom when he was arrested and poisoned, when his his plane from Germany just landed in Russia, and he was arrested right away. Those days, I was protesting in Komsomolsk, and it was a crazy experience because it was -40 in my hometown, and there were more
When was
policemen.
that? When did Navalny get arrested?
It was, I believe, January 2020, as far as I remember. Yeah, maybe
Oh, so that wasn't that
2021.
long ago. That was right before COVID.
Yeah. Maybe actually it was 2021 because I was remember policemen were saying us to get away from the streets because of the COVID restrictions, not because it's prohibited to go protest. And the second time I went to big protests about Sergei Furgal. That's a guy who was a governor of Khabarovsk territory, my hometown region, and he was arrested in also, I believe, summer 2020 because he was kind of critical for the current government, and he was trying to fight with corruption in Khabarovsk territory. And he was arrested for some fake case, like he killed somebody in the 90s. And people, even my grandparents, they went to the streets to protect, the governor, because he was pretty good. And that was the biggest protest, I believe, in Khabarovsk territory, like in all times, in the whole history of its territory. So that's the protest I've participated in.
So would
Russia
you? I
before.
mean, I'm developing a pattern here. Would you say that people in the Far East are more likely to protest or have critical views of the central government in Moscow?
That's a really interesting question, actually. It's hard to say, but I think since there is 7,000 kilometers from Moscow in the Far East, people kind of feel that they are being a colony of Moscow in some way.
Sure.
And also,
Yeah.
I think the Khabarovsk territory was just really lucky with our governor, Sergei Furgal, who actually just, he's still in prison. And I guess he's going to be there for 20 more years if the things just go like this. I don't really think they are just being more critical than, like, let's say Moscow. I don't think so, because I think Moscow and St. Petersburg, maybe Ekaterinburg, are the most protestive cities, because basically that's the city where most of youngers are going, and people who don't support the current government and Putin especially. I wouldn't say like Khabarovsk is more protestive than Moscow or St. Petersburg. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you were almost arrested. You had to escape the police from the protest that night, correct?
Oh, yes, correct. I got a separate video on this, how I was escaping from the police. But at one point, just imagine that picture, a narrow street of old Moscow, me alone, I was separate from the crowd, running from 4 policemen from behind, and 2 policemen are trying to block my way. And there is nobody else on the street except me and 6 policemen. And somehow I've made it out. Actually, it's such a hard emotionally. I think I got PTSD actually after that, because every time I see policemen, especially like a Russian uniform, and in the last couple of days after that, I literally felt really anxious when I just seen a policeman. And since now, sometimes I go jogging, and when I'm like dying, when I don't have any more energy, I just remember hey Zach, just do you remember how you were running from the police? And that gives me energy, that gives me power to run like 100 more meters.
You got to
Yeah.
keep exercising to prepare yourself for future
Oh,
protests.
yes. I was actually so glad. I used to do basketball back in Russia. I was in a local team of the city of Birobidzhan, the city where I was living for a couple of years. And I was so lucky I got this experience. It helped me to run. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Such a PTSD.
So let's talk about now your decision-making process to leave Russia. When did you leave Russia, and what ultimately made you decide you had to do this?
Yeah, so basically I left Russia the 3rd of March. So basically 1.5 week after 21st of February. And the reason for this, there were a couple of reasons. Firstly, I was really paranoid the policeman just gonna track me down. It happened many times to many activists who have been to protests before for Navalny, and that protest 21st of February was way more cruel than the protest for Navalny. So I was thinking they're gonna track down every single protester. The next day, actually, 25th of February, I was teaching a Russian lesson, because sometimes I teach Russian to my foreign subscribers from YouTube. And at one point, I got somebody knocked the door, and my roommate, he just came to me in my room. It's like, Zach, this is for you. I was like, no way. What am I doing? What's my plan? And I lived on the second floor in this Khrushchevka Soviet building, and I was thinking, okay, maybe I'll just jump down from the balcony and just run away. And it was still snow. I could just jump in the snow; it would be okay. But then I was like, no, it's too much, Zach. You're going crazy. So basically, I ended up hiding on the balcony. I was literally laying in the balcony. So I was thinking, okay, in case policemen are going to be lazy, they will just enter my room. They will see there is nobody, and they'll just go for other protesters. And I was laying down in this balcony for maybe like a couple of minutes, and then it appeared to be not policeman, but another friend of mine, and he just came. He's like, Zach, what are you doing there? Why are you lying on the balcony? So I was really paranoid. And every time I've seen the policemen, I was thinking okay, this is for me. So one of the reasons to leave was just for, let's say, security, and also like, let's say, health, emotional health, like, also, what were I supposed to do in Russia, like to film, like especially since I got my plans about YouTube. I was thinking, okay, there is a war going on. Like Ukrainians are dying every day because of my country. Am I just going to film how beautiful Moscow is? Is this what am I going to do according to my plan? Of course not. And we all, I didn't know if the mobilization is going to happen in the next few days, or there's going to be a default, and they're not going to let people to go out from Russia. So already on the 28th or 27th, I think, of February, I bought a ticket to flee Russia on the 3rd of March. And 3rd of March, I went to Baku, Azerbaijan, just to leave. Yeah.
So you chose to fly. You didn't try and drive to the border.
Yeah. At that point, there were still some of the tickets were available. In the last couple of days after I bought a ticket, maybe like 1st of March, tickets were already sold out. But I was kind of like fast enough to buy tickets in advance, so it was okay.
And ultimately, you made it to Georgia.
Yeah, I made it to Georgia, but there is no direct flights from Russia to Georgia and vice versa, because 2008 Russia invaded Georgia, and since then there is no like official political relationships between Russia and Georgia. So yeah,
that's really bizarre that they would not allow direct flights because of the war, but then they allow visa-free entry.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh, Georgian government is a very big topic. I don't think Georgian government is really democratic, and it seems to me that they are afraid of Russia since 2008. And basically, the government that had a war with Russia is different. It was Mikhail Saakashvili who had war with Russia, but right now it's a different party ruling here, and some of the locals calling it's called Georgian Dream, but some of the Georgians calling it Kremlin Dream. So yeah.
I don't entirely know the history. I don't know all the details, but my understanding is that when Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, they were advancing to the capital city. They were going to take it all, and Georgia made some kind of deal to stop the war. And I think part of that deal involved, visa-free entry for Russians that want to go into Georgia, and that's something that has just stuck since then. But as far as the people, the government's different, but the people in Georgia, they're very pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russian. So I'll just go ahead and ask you, how do you feel like you've been treated so far living in Georgia as a Russian citizen?
Actually, even though like there are many tensions with Russia in Georgia and with Russians, I was treated really well, especially the first days of the war when I came. I came to Tbilisi, the capital of Georgia, 13th of March. So many people, especially like people who were given some services for me, like taxi drivers, let's say, they were just really curious what the Russians who come here, what do they think about the war? Are they pro-war? Are they against it? And every time the taxi driver would ask me like about the war, and I would tell you, yeah, like it's really bad, like Putin law and everything, war is bad, and like Putin is war criminal. They would just say me, oh, you're my brother. If you need any help, just call me. Some people even ask me for a barbecue with their family. So it was really nice. And then I never faced myself like direct Russophobia or something, as Russian propagandists are like trying to spread this information like, yeah, there is Russophobia in the world. I wouldn't say that. Like once you show your position, once you say, yeah, I'm actually, I don't support the war, people are absolutely okay with it, with you. And most of the people, yeah, like if I see a person, I usually start my conversation in English because I just don't want to. Yeah, many Georgians, they know Russian language because they used to be part of the USSR. But since 1991, Georgia is an independent country, and most of the youngers in Georgia, young people, they're actually learning more of English than Russian. And if I just want to start my conversation, I don't want to be like, oh yeah, I'm Russian and you have to speak my language. No, you don't. Nobody had to speak my language. So I start English with English, and then when people hear my Russian accent, they can switch to Russian if they know Russian. So that's how it goes. Mostly, I would say most of the Georgians are pretty okay, and they say like, okay, like, yeah, Putin is bad, but there are some people who are against it, and not every Russian is like a fascist and stuff. So for the most part, it's okay.
That's interesting that you offer to speak in English first, and then if they are comfortable speaking in Russian, you can do that. Have you been learning any of the native Georgian language?
I know a couple of phrases, but I wouldn't say that I know more than just basic Georgian language. And it's okay
Sure.
because most of, at least if you talk to a person, at least they know either English or Russian in 100%. I met a couple of people who didn't spoke both of the languages, but usually it's more of an exception than a rule. And most of the people who don't know any other languages except Georgian language, they're from the villages. They live in villages. So yeah.
So how grateful are you that you studied English and that you can use that now to travel outside of Russia, pretty much anywhere you want to go?
Oh yes, I'm really grateful for just learning English. Yeah, it's actually, I know a couple of Russians here in Georgia who didn't know English at all, and I don't really understand how they kind of like even go to the cafe, because most of the young
Yeah,
Georgians, they don't know any Russian, so you gotta use some
yeah.
translator or something like this, or just go to the place where people speak Russian. And actually, Russians here in Tbilisi, they opened a couple of local places like bars, cafes, co-workings, restaurants. So yeah, there are a couple of them, but not like everything. So yeah.
That's really interesting to think about it as an American, just that, English is being spoken by these different peoples to communicate. Let's now talk about your family. You've made some big life decisions this year, fleeing your country and living in exile. Can I ask, what is the opinion of your family back in Russia? Are they generally being supportive of what you've done?
Yeah, that's actually a tough question. Because my family is kind of like the opinions in my family about the war and everything is really separated. Let's say, uh, my mom. Let's start with my mom. So the 25th of February, I called my mom and said like, "Oh, I went to the protest," and she was crazy mad at me. She said because 24th of February, she said to me strictly. She just called me. She didn't even know I was going to the protest. She just called me. She was like, "Zach, no protests, please, no protests." I was like, "Mom, I'm an adult. I'm responsible for my actions. Please, stay away." So 25th of February, I called her and said, "Look, Mom, um, I decided to leave Russia." And she answered, "Zach, why are you fleeing from a sinking ship like a rat?" That's what she said. And I answered, "How can you not to run from a ship like that when the captain is an idiot? It's a suicide." So she didn't answer anything, but actually the next day she called me and she said, "Okay, Zach, whatever your decision is, I support you. You are an adult. You are a wise young man. So whatever you do, I support it. You should know better what to do with your life." So that was my mom's initial reaction. And then once I left to Georgia, yeah, she was really afraid of me going somewhere because before I went to the U.S., it was my first ever experience going abroad, and I was totally being carried by my host family, by the exchange program. But here I'm going to a foreign country, even though that's a post-Soviet country, and people, at least my mom, knows something about Georgia. It's not like going to Argentina, let's say. My mom would freak out. But she was pretty supportive after that. And speaking of her position on the war, my mom believes in some conspiracy theories. I believe there was an accident. So when I was in Baku, the 4th of March, when I left firstly to Baku, not directly to Tbilisi, I was staying in a hostel, and I've met many other Russians, and I also met a Ukrainian refugee. Her name was Veta, and we've made an interview with her on my channel later after that. And at the moment when she was telling us, she's from Kiev, and at the moment she was telling us about how she was leaving her house at the 24th of February, and the next day a rocket basically was hit her house. We were listening to this, like mostly Russians who were also fled Russia, and at that point I got a message from my mom, and my mom was saying, "Oh, Zach, I just found out Putin is actually, he's not real. He's being photoshopped by American programmers." And at that moment, when I see a person who literally suffered because of actions of Russia, and people who are being brainwashed or just stupid in Russia, that's like the consequence of actions of them. I literally started to cry. I got tears in my eyes. And later, like every single day, I've started to call my mom to send you the pictures of like broken houses, like what Russian army did in Ukraine.
So you're saying initially she believed there were conspiracy theories and that Ukrainian people weren't actually suffering.
She was saying that basically, I don't even understand the logic. So she was saying, okay, Putin is fake, so the Americans are actually controlling the actions of Russia, so they would attack Ukraine to basically,
okay, I've not heard this conspiracy theory.
to disrespect Russia in the international community. And then later she was like, okay, maybe Putin is actually real, but I don't really understand why is he doing that. But he should know better because he is a smart guy. He saved Russia.
You've mentioned in your videos that your stepfather is more educated. Does he have a more grounded opinion on what's happening right now?
I was actually speaking to kind of happened like a family thing. So I have like two stepdads. So the first one is like my main stepdad, whom I consider as a dad, and he is really educated and he's against the war, even though he works in like police department and they got a bunch of propaganda. He's really critical of many things he hears. So he's against the war for the most part. And my stepdad, who is like my actual stepdad right now, he's actually serving in the Russian army. But he's stationed.
So your mother remarried, correct?
Yeah, remarried basically. Yeah. And
so your initial stepdad you view as more of a fatherly figure, but your mom divorced and is remarried, and you have a new stepfather.
Yeah, basically. All right.
I just wanted to clarify that for the audience, that your mom is not married to two men.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's not like a Swedish type of relationships. Anyway, so my new stepdad, he is serving in the army, and he's against Putin and the war, and he's actually one of the most criticized in person of whom I know among people who are, let's say, older than 35 or 40. And the thing happened the way that he served in the army, basically because he got a business, maybe like 2011 or 2012, and the Russian people, they're not really educated financially, and he just didn't know that if you had a business, you actually got to pay taxes. So he didn't pay taxes, and he might ended up in the prison for this. Then Putin actually announced amnesty. We call it amnesty in Russian. So he called amnesty, and my stepdad didn't end up in jail because of not paying taxes. And in the Far East, if you're not doing any kind of business, small business, and if you're not working in the government, the only way of making money is basically going to the military. So that's why my stepdad appeared to be in the military. But thanks God, he didn't go to Ukraine, and he actually, I talked to him, and he told if
wait, is he in the military now?
Yes, he is still in the military.
But he's not stationed in Ukraine. He's somewhere else.
No, he is stationed in Komsomolsk-on-Amur in my hometown, and what he does over there, he just works with cameras, because he was installing cameras in his business. And in Russian army, It's not like you got a special specialization. That's what you're gonna do in the army. No, if you just got skills, if you just know how to do something, you're gonna do that. That's it. That's how it works. So he knows how to work with cameras, with like CCTV cameras. So he was doing those stuff, like because that military base where he serves is like tank base. So they have a bunch of old T-62 Soviet tanks too. Nobody wants this crap, but he still have to secure that. And he told that since the start of the war, 24 hours, what his military base is doing, they are just repairing tanks and sending them to Ukraine. So that's what they do all the time. I asked him what's going to happen.
I feel like if you're repairing stuff, you might want to do it closer to the conflict zone and not in the Far East. But you're saying that he repairs it in the Far East, and then it has to get trains sent back to.
Yeah, I believe they fixed not the tanks that were actually in the battlefield, but they're fixing the tanks from the whole Far Eastern region, from the Far Eastern military region, that are just rotten old tanks like T-62, T-72 from the 70s, from the 80s, which are like really old, and they're not being able to start.
So I'm trying to understand this stepfather who's currently in the Russian military. He's critical of the war, correct?
Yeah, right. He is really critical of the war. Yeah.
So does he have any kind of internal conflict with what he's doing, repairing military equipment that might end up back in the war zone?
Yeah, of course. He is just. I think he's actually really depressed because he cannot just leave the army. It is just not possible. It's not like contract with your employee on a default job, basic job. It's you ask for to leave, but the military decides do they actually let you leave, and he
well they're not gonna let anyone go.
Basically you're right. So and the problem is
they're not gonna let anyone go until the government collapses.
right. And the problem is that he's the only source of income in my family, and my family, they got a mortgage. They before the war, like half a year ago, before 24th of February, they took a new apartment for the mortgage for like 30 years. So if he leaves the army, the only source of income for my family, that's basically it for the family. They're gonna be like just starving.
Do you have brothers and sisters?
No, I'm the only one child in the family.
Oh wow.
Yeah, and I know it's tough. Sometimes I help with my family with money, but not much because it's military actually pays well, and in the Far East, that's the only work you can do if you want to make money right away after, let's say, school, or if you don't have any experience or any specialization. Actually, I think half of my classmates, like high school classmates, they ended up either in the military or in the police or in some kind of government.
So do you know any friends from high school from the Far East that are currently in Ukraine?
Yeah, actually, I know one guy. I'm not sure if he's right now in Ukraine, but I know that he was in Ukraine in like April. And he texted, basically he's from my middle school, my classmate from middle school from the city of Birobidzhan. His name is Alexander. And he just texted in our chat, like, we got an old classmates chat on the Russian VK, like social media. And he just texted, "Oh, hey guys from Ukraine." Nobody answered anything. And I just answered like, "What the hell are you doing there, idiot? Go back." And he never answered anything back to me. And that he's like one of the few guys. And I've seen he was following a couple of the like Z supporter communities. And when I remember what kind of guy was he was one of that bullies, one of the guys who was like a bully in school. And he was also really into the criminal culture of AOE. That's like more like a child criminal culture, and it's really popular in the Far East of Russia, because there were so many gulags, which were after the collapse of the USSR transformed just to the prisons, and many people were actually amnestied, like they went free after the collapse of the USSR, and that criminal culture in the Far East really got popular. So he was one of those guys.
Yeah, they were all pardoned and released when the Soviet Union collapsed.
Yeah, not all of them, but most of them. Yeah.
So let's talk about propaganda, because you went through, I assume, the public education system in Russia, in which, especially the last 8 to 10 years, it's I love Vladimir Putin. Putin is the greatest Russian leader of all time. How did it fail on you? Why are you not a Z patriot right now?
Yeah, I could become one of them actually super easily. I think there are many factors which affected. I've also have a separate video on this explaining every single factor that affected me, in my opinion. But if to be short, first I think that's self-education. Basically, when I was in high school, I started to learn a lot of social studies and history by myself, and also just just reading by student books. And at that point, I started to compare what is written in the books to the reality, what is going on. For example, like in our social study book, it was saying that when a person is actually ruling more than 2 terms, it is bad. And I was like, okay, who was a president when I was born? Vladimir Putin. Who is still a president? Vladimir Putin. So the puzzle didn't really stick to what was saying in the books to the reality. So I started to compare it, and I've found out many things. Also, I think like personal example of some of my relatives who were really educated. I wouldn't say they are one of the like political activists of Russia, but they were just educated people. And myself, like my mother, she's like from the village. She's not like the most educated people. I still love her. She's really wise, but not really like she doesn't know much about history and social studies. And once I've seen other people who were actually really smart and who were making money with their brain, I was like, okay, I gotta get smarter to make my life better. So that kind of like what affected me. Also, I think internet, yeah, thanks the access to the internet, that I was able to Google stuff myself and to see that there is a different opinion on many things which are being presented by the TV propaganda. Because before, like in 2014, when Russia annexed Crimea, I was 13 years old, and oh my gosh, I was so under the influence of propaganda because I just watched a lot of TV and I just listened to what my mom says. And I remember 2014, it was a national celebration for Russia. Yes, finally we took Crimea back, as they were saying. And I remember I went to my middle school, to my teacher of English. She was like the main teacher for that moment because she was like just in charge of our marks, let's say. And I told her, oh, it's so great that Russia finally took Crimea back. Let's have a rally supporting Vladimir Putin, that he's such a great leader, making Russia stronger. And my English teacher, she was not actually so happy about it. And she told me, okay, Zach, I will let you to grow a little bit, and then maybe you will change your opinion. So at that moment, I was fully Z, as we say today. But then, since I've started to grow and to learn a lot of myself, at the age of, I believe, 16, I already understood that, okay, nothing is great, not everything is great with annexation of Crimea. And basically my main point was when I was learning the constitution of the Russian Federation in my high school, I found out that the subjects of Russia, like the states of Russia, we can call, they do not have the right to call a referendum and to ask for independence. They just cannot leave Russia if they want to. So I was thinking, what moral right does Russia have to go to a separate independent country and to provide a referendum for its territory if the regions of Russia cannot do it themselves? What moral right? So that's the first thing that started to add.
There are lots of those kinds of contradictions where Russia is saying, hey, if this province in someone else's country, Donetsk, Luhansk, wants to vote for independence, then they should be recognized. And my response is, well, if Chechnya wants to vote for independence or fight for independence, why can't it then be its own country separate for Russia?
Yeah.
So I guess the takeaway from what you're telling me is that access to the internet and just learning information dispelled or disproved the Kremlin propaganda that you were receiving in school. That's interesting that you said that you had an English teacher. Is English a mandatory subject in your primary school, or were you learning it as an elective?
I would say both, but it is mandatory to have English classes since the second grade, basically since the 8 years old. up to the 11th grade when you finish in your high
So
school.
in public school in Russia, everyone has to learn some English.
Yes, but I would say that most of the people, when they study English for 9 years, they didn't know any English at all. Like in the 11th grade, most of my classmates, they were like, okay, hello, my name is Denise, and London is the capital of Great Britain. That's the highest level of English they had. Yeah. So mostly people who know English, I'm sorry, they are learning by themselves, and with a lot of private teachers, I would say. I was learning English with a private teacher for the most part, and private teacher is not like an elite stuff in Russia, because private teachers are pretty affordable, even for a poor family. My family is not like rich, or it's not even like middle class. I'd say it's more like a poor family, but we were still
Sure,
able
I'm
to.
sure that
Yeah,
I'm sure there are English tutors everywhere,
yeah,
especially in Russia, and they can work with children to learn the basics. But I feel like, given everything that's happened this year, it has to be the priority of Moscow, of the Kremlin, to stop people from learning English so they don't have access to outside informational sources. If they only want them consuming Russian state media and Russian state TV, then learning or having access to information in a foreign language has to be detrimental to the Kremlin party line. So I'm just thinking about what decisions are being made by the Kremlin right now to stop people from being corrupted like
yeah.
just learning basic information and realizing the contradictions. And I know you're just one person and you're just one YouTuber, relatively small channel, 41,000 subscribers, but spending 5 months in the United States in Minneapolis, I imagine that had a huge impact on you to be critical of your own government and supportive to, as Russia would call it, Western ideals, freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom to protest. So it's just very interesting seeing what, as an American, my tax dollars paid for, because you said this was a scholarship through
Yeah,
the U.S.
yeah,
State
yeah.
Department.
Right.
This is what
It
funded you
was
to come
funded by
over
the
here.
American embassy, right? So.
So I just think about the value. I'm just reflecting on the value of all of those people like you that got scholarships and were just able to spend a couple months in the United States
Yeah,
and talk to real Americans.
yeah.
And
To be honest, I wouldn't say that like the U.S. experience really shaped my political views, because even
you were
before.
already feeling this prior to that.
Yeah, right. Because I went to the protest before I went to the US, and I was kind of like oppositionally minded to the government for a long time. But I know some of the people whom I've met in the US through my exchange program who were also Russian, because we got this orientation in DC, in Washington DC, like 150 Russians in one hotel not far from the White House, having those how do you say, like people who were taking care of us and just showing us around the US, just telling us about what we should be aware in the United States. And some of the people after that the US after that American experience, they changed their opinions about Russian government, like in many things. So I think in some way it got its influence, like the all the exchange programs and everything. Yeah. And actually it was actually interesting that my first time I went to rally and was not afraid to be arrested. It was in the U.S. because my roommates with whom I was staying in the host family, and there were two guys from Afghanistan who were living in the U.S. for, let's say, 4 years or 5 years. And at that time, Taliban took power in Afghanistan, and they were really anxious about what was going in Afghanistan, and they went to rally, and I just wanted to help them to rally, just to help them with water, because they were organizing an event. And that was the first time I've ever seen people just expressing their opinion and not being beaten up by the police, not being arrested by the police. It was my first ever experience.
People protest about absolutely everything all the time here in the
Yeah,
United
yeah.
States.
It was a cultural shock for sure.
So let's talk about your future. What would be necessary to happen in Russia where you would feel like it would be safe to return?
Yeah, for me it seems like, firstly, of course, Putin is jailed. He's not at the power. I don't know, dead, jailed, whatever you prefer. Secondly, the ex-KGB elites who are ruling Russia with Putin, they're also like out of the power. Because, some people are saying, okay, that's just Putin. It's just Putin who starts everything, and once Putin is gone, everything's going to be all right. I don't think so. I think there are some people who are like Putin in his inner circle. Let's say Patrushev, the head of FSB, like ex-KGB, we can say. He's a really cruel guy. If he can come to power after Putin easily, and what's going to happen after that? Well, the Soviet Union too, I think. So I'm not really positive like Putin gone, everything's going to change. I don't think so. I think only once like all those people who are from the inner circle, once they're going to be gone, maybe illustrated, not being able to take those positions by law, only after that. Because I don't think it's going to be safe, and I don't think it's going to be like absolutely democratic right away after Putin's gone. Yeah.
I agree with you that Putin has to go one way or another, dead or alive. He needs to be removed from power, and I'm not entirely optimistic that the FSB won't remain in control. But I personally think that mobilization was such a disaster, losing 500,000 or more people fleeing the country. At some point, they're going to have to offer amnesty to all those men and say, all right, the war in Ukraine is over. This is, once again, in the future, the war in Ukraine is over. But some future, possibly authoritarian governments ruled by the FSB will have to grant amnesty and say, just come back. Our economy needs you. We need young, intelligent, working people in order to save Russia. So you might get an opportunity to go home, even if Russia manages to stay together. But let me get your opinion. What is the probability of Putin being removed from power? Like, how do you think it's looking currently in Russia? Do you think Putin's going to be able to somehow survive this and hold on, or where do you think it's going for him?
Yeah, we discuss this question all the time with my Russian friends here in Georgia, everywhere in the world. That's a really tough question. I think there is no possibility for the revolution in Russia, because in my opinion, if we speak in how many people do support the war, I would say it's just my personal opinion that there are 10% who are actively against the war, like myself, who are ready to go to the streets. Only 10%, and most of them, they fled the country already before the mobilization. Some of them are still there anyway. So 10%, those who are actively against it, 20% of those who are actively pro-war, and they were against Ukraine even before the 24th of February. They just didn't like Ukraine, and they were actively ready to show their position. And other 70%, as we say in Russian language, is a gray mass. Literally gray mass, who has no opinion, no political values, nothing. They do not care. They treat politics as the weather. Today the weather is good, okay, great. Today the weather is bad, well, in a couple of days it's going to be good. That's how they treat politics. And I got many relatives who are like this. They just do not care what's going on in Russia. They just, okay, I got my job, I got my fridge full, I can travel to Turkey once a year, okay, my life is good. They do not care about anything else. This is how it looks like. So I don't think that those 10% of Russians who are against the war and who are, outside of Russia for the most part, they could make a revolution. And if we think about, let's say, Maidan in Ukraine in 2014, who are usually the people who are making revolutions, fighting the policemen? If you just look at the videos from Maidan, there are a couple of them on YouTube.
Young men.
It's like young men, and also I would say the men aged from 30 to 40, like the men who are ready to fight, who are strong. They got nothing to lose. And firstly, in Russia, there is a really big crisis of young men. As far as I know, at least there are 60% of females and 40% of males. Because 90s, it was a pretty harsh time for Russian men. Most of the people, well, like let's say people around 40 or like 50, when I'm asking about what they were doing in the 90s, they were just either participating in some gang fights, or they were trying to just, kill some pigeons to feed their families. So many of them.
There was a collapse in the birth rate in the 90s, so an entire generation of men who should be in their 20s and 30s now were never born.
Yes, exactly. Also, if we, let's say, speak about my shock when I came to Moscow for the first time when I was 17, I entered the university in Moscow for free, and when I came to Moscow, I've just seen those adult men whom I haven't seen in my region. Literally in the Far East, in Komsomolsk on Amur especially, if you go out to the streets and just look at the people who are passing by, you will see mostly those are babushkas, some old ladies and old men, like in the age of like 60s, 70s, 80s, a lot of young children and teenagers, but not much of young men. Because all of them, if they want to make money, if they want to live good, they go to Moscow. And in Moscow, Russian government is trying to make the best life of whole Russia. Like they are trying to make Moscow, and Moscow is really a really comfortable city. I got many American friends who were living in Moscow for a couple of years, and they are saying that Moscow is one of the most comfortable cities in the whole world. So they are trying to make Moscow so good and so comfortable for every young people who go from their regions, so they would not be so protestive. And it kind of works in many ways. So I don't think there is going to be revolution, just to sum up, because there is just not much of those people who are eligible to make the revolution to happen. I think maybe there's going to be some, let's say, putsch by the military.
A coup? A coup?
Yeah, by the military, maybe.
Are you familiar with that word?
Not really, to be honest. Yeah, we call putsch. It's basically when the military takes power. They arrest the president.
Yeah, a coup is a French word, but in English we use it COUP, coup d'état. And yeah, maybe the FSB or the military will just take power.
Somebody from the inner circle, they will see, okay, this guy is just weak. He was not able to conquer even Ukraine. So what are we talking about? How are we going to fight with NATO? So I guess somebody's from the inner circle. And it's not a fact, because we've seen with whom people surrounded himself. Those are the weakest kind of people.
Putin's done a very good job the last 20 years of purging anyone that might challenge him or might take the initiative.
Yeah, right. So we
everyone is complicit in his crime. Everyone has blood on their hands.
Yeah, right.
If he gets purged, they all have to be purged as well.
Yeah, it's interesting how tough, he got this Council of Security, meeting of the Council of Security before the 21st of February, when they recognized Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics. So we've seen how those people were given speeches, especially Naryshkin, who is the head of the intelligence service of Russia, Sergei Naryshkin. He was almost not crying, but he was almost shaking when Putin asked.
I saw that video.
Yes. So that's kind of the people who surround Putin. His friends from his childhood, from teenagerhood, and from his student years, from when he was 20 or 30, and just a bunch of weak people, those who are able to do whatever he wants just to please him. Yeah, that's it. How those people are going to take some actions against it, knowing that there is a huge chance they're going to be arrested and they're going to be put in jail for the rest of their lives, and their families too. So I don't really know. Yeah.
I think if it happens, when it happens, it'll be very sudden. It's going to be one of these moments where you're going to wake up and you'll have 300 text messages in a group chat because something crazy just happens, and then the whole world will react.
Yeah.
But I don't think 48 hours anyone will see it coming. So it's going to be sudden, it's going to be quick.
Oh yes, it's going to be quick. And we actually among my friends, we got this phrase, we say, we will rave on Putin's grave. And I can just imagine everyone just sending me these messages the day it happens. Just waiting for the happy day, I guess.
So you've started, as you describe, your own media company called RT News, standing for Russia Tomorrow, a play on words of Russia Today. Can I just ask you, what is your goals? What is What do you want to accomplish with what you're doing?
Yeah, basically the main goal was to make my subscribers to be informed what was going on. And basically because once mobilization started in Russia, 21st of September, I started to do live streams on my channel every single day just to show people what's going on in Russia. Because not like Western medias are kind of late on sharing much information from like Russian sources, and most of the sources I have is based on Telegram, and Americans, they don't, like the Westerners, they don't really use Telegram. And so basically I was the person who was able to share the information the first with my audience. And at some point I was live streaming for, let's say, 10 days in a row, and I was really tired of every day like live streaming for 3 or 2 hours, telling my subscribers what is going on, sharing the news. So I decided, okay, why don't I create just a channel, a Telegram channel with news, which it's basically gonna be, it's not gonna be a full journalistic work. What we're gonna do, which is gonna translate most of the sources. Me and my friend, that's my friend Misha, who is an editor, we read ourselves, and we're just gonna translate it, and to translate videos and pictures you're gonna see from mobilization in Russia, and people have seen it. So that was the main point of creating a media, not to live stream and to make videos every day for those people who want to be updated on what's going on mobilization in Russia. So that was the initial plan. Right now, I kind of feel like that, it's just starting to become just a basic news media source from Russia. And I hope maybe it can grow to a bigger project. But right now, there are only 2 people who are doing it, me and my friend Misha. So that's it. And we just want to, keep our subscribers be updated on what's going on in Russia. That's it.
Well, I appreciate you speaking out. I appreciate you representing all the Russian men living in exile. And I know what degree they're anti-Putin or anti-government or pro-Ukrainian varies, but as long as you can help get the word out and share information, it all in aggregate contributes, and I appreciate that, Zach.
Thank you, Jake.
We've come up on an hour here. Do you have any questions you'd like to ask me? I always want to give people this opportunity.
Actually, I just wanted to say that I wish there would be more people on YouTube who speaks English and who can show that there are still Russians who are against the war, not to dehumanize every single Russian, because there are still many people out there who are against the war, and it is really important for me that people give me opportunity to speak and to show that there are still some adequate Russians who are not fascists. So yeah, it's a really great opportunity, and yeah, just thank you, Jake, for just giving it for me. Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, it's complicated, and you always have to remember that the people are not the government. As an American, I have not been supportive of what my government has done the last 250 years for a lot of things.
Yeah.
But in America, we always want to be having this debate. We want to keep our freedoms, and we do our best to help people around the world if we can. And as an American, as a veteran myself, I'm extremely proud of what we're doing currently to help the Ukrainian people. And if we can push back, beat back Russia today, hopefully this can prevent wars in the future. This can prevent needless suffering in the future. I've talked about this in previous podcasts, but to me, it's astonishing what Putin and his inner circle has done, because they already had so much. Russia was already food secure, energy secure, running trade surpluses. The billionaires in Moscow and St. Petersburg were getting richer and richer. Why was this necessary? Yes, by some accounts, Putin was already the richest man in the world, stealing the wealth of Russia for 20 plus years. And for every man that has it all, what do they want? They just want more. And I just can't fathom it. And I think this is an important historical lesson currently happening. The humbling of Putin to dictators going forward in the future. I want them to know, well, maybe don't do that. President Xi, don't try that in Southeast Asia because look what happened to
Yeah,
Putin. Can
right.
we can we can we establish some new precedents going forward that the democratic world, the free world, we will oppose you.
Yeah, right.
So that's basically the bottom line from my whole channel these last 8 months.
Yeah, you're doing a really great job covering what's going on the battlefield and just the news in general, like interview and others. Yeah, I've seen a bunch of interviews with like Vlad Vexler and the Russian dude, and it's really great that you give people the opportunity to speak out, to show their position, and just to share those channels with your viewers. You're doing a great job, and yeah, you just said that imagine what Russia would be if there would be no Putin, would be somebody different. Russia would be like Dubai with that much of oil, but just different and maybe democratic, who knows. I really hope that someday Russia will become a democratic state and it's not going to threat the whole world with nuclear weapon and invading its neighbors. And we got to work on this. Democracy is hard, and there is much of work to be done for the future generations, including myself. And I hope someday it's going to be different. Yeah.
All right, Zach, I think that's about as much time as we have. Thank you so much for appearing on the channel. I greatly appreciate it. To everyone watching this podcast, if you made it this far, go check out Zach's channel, give him support. I'm sure he appreciates it. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Jake, and Slava Ukraini.